You seem to play this game differently than everybody else.
I sort of wonder, I think I probably am a bit crazy. But maybe that's sort of a healthy sign, because at the point at which you conclude you're not crazy at all, then you probably are. I'm trying to allocate my efforts to that which I think would most affect the future of humanity in a positive way. And I think there's lots of entrepreneurial energy and financing headed towards the internet, whereas in certain sectors like automotive and solar and space, you don't see new entrants. There's not a lot of capital going to startups, and not a lot of entrepreneurs going into those arenas. And the problem is that in the absence of some new entrants into an industry, you don't have that force for innovation. It's really new entrants that drive innovation more than anything. That's why I have devoted my efforts to those industries. And there are industries that require quite a bit of capital to get going. Even with SpaceX, I invest. My proceeds from PayPal after tax were about $180 million. 100 of that went into SpaceX, 70 into Tesla, and 10 into SolarCity. Now I literally had to borrow money for rent. I didn't actually seek investor funding for the first 3 rounds of SpaceX because the first thing that investors want to ask you is sort of, well, tell us about prior successes in this field. When you've got kind of the donut in the success category and a lot of a cemetery full of failures, then they're not that keen. And rockets are just pretty far out of the comfort zone of most venture capitalists. Now, we were able to get venture funding after we've made some progress and demonstrated that we were able to almost get to orbit. But I did have to show that I could actually make stuff. Like, I never actually made physical stuff before SpaceX. So let alone rockets, the probability of success was low. In fact, when I started SpaceX, I thought that the most likely outcome was failure. To have any other expectation would have been irrational.
So why did you want to do it? I know for Tesla it seems more obvious, like, oh, save the planet, big automakers aren't doing this, that's
right.
Good for humanity. Why did you feel like SpaceX needed to be done?
If you look at the trajectory of space technology and progress, the pinnacle of that progress was around maybe 1969, 1970, with the moon missions. We made incredible progress in the 60s, and then we were able to land on the moon. And then with the space shuttle, we could only get people to low Earth orbit. Now the space shuttle is retired, and that's just no trajectory of improvement. It's a trajectory to nothing. I think you want to have a future where you're expecting things to be better, not one where you're expecting things to be worse. Speaking of crazy things, went to Russia 3 times to negotiate a deal to buy a couple of the largest ICBMs in the Russian fleet. The reason we haven't advanced in space is because the cost of space transportation has become unaffordable. It's become more and more expensive to do less and less in space. And we really need to improve the technology of space transportation. So that's why I started SpaceX. It may seem odd that I would start SpaceX with an expectation of failure, but bear in mind that my initial thing was to do essentially a philanthropic mission with a 0% chance of success from a financial standpoint. So it would have effectively been a donation to the cause. And so anything better than that is a win.
What it's like to put that much work into something and be doing something that really no one else is doing.
Yeah.
And at least trying something and putting that much of your own money in it, that you're having to borrow money from friends to pay your rent, and there are launches and it's failing.
Well, it super sucks. 2008 in particular was awful because we had the 3rd launch failure in a row of our Falcon 1 vehicle at SpaceX. The Tesla financing round that we were raising fell apart because the economy was going to tailspin. And it's pretty hard to raise money for a startup car company, late 2008 when GM and Chrysler are busy going bankrupt. That was tough. And then SolarCity had a deal with Morgan Stanley, and Morgan Stanley had to renege on the deal because they themselves were running out of money. So it looked like all 3 companies were going to die, and I was also going through a divorce. So that was definitely a low point. But fortunately, the 4th launch worked. I thought the odds of it working were better than 50%. Yeah, that was a very tough call. At the end of 2008, that was probably one of the toughest calls I've had to make, because I could either reserve capital for one company or the other. I mean, fortunately, SolarCity didn't need a ton of capital, so they were okay. But between SpaceX and Tesla, it's sort of like if you've got two kids, and what do? Do you spend all your money to maximize the probability of success of one, or do you try to keep both alive? I knew that if I did try to start an electric car company and run it, that it would be extremely painful to run two companies. I really tried my hardest not to be the CEO of Tesla. At any point from day one, I could have been the CEO because I had majority control of the company. I really tried not to, and in the end, it was at the end of 2008. I had to commit all of my reserve capital to Tesla. All that wasn't allocated to SpaceX, and so I felt I had to sort of steer the ship directly. There may come a point, several years in the future, where the fundamental good that Tesla is trying to accomplish, which is to serve as a catalyst for the acceleration of sustainable transport, has been accomplished. In other words, an historical standpoint, or what's important here in affecting the world. To what degree is Tesla serving as a catalyst for the advent of electric vehicles? At some point, when say most cars being manufactured are electric, then that will have been accomplished, and or the catalytic value of Tesla will have been realized, and there'll be diminishing returns in that regard. And I think at that point, I would not need to run the company.
What would you advise entrepreneurs watching this or in the audience to make sure they don't live through what you did in the bad experiences? And can you tell us about the bad experience?
Well, I think one thing that's important is if you have a choice of a lower valuation with someone you really like, or a higher valuation with someone you have a question mark about, take the lower valuation. It's better to have a higher quality venture capitalist who you think would be great to work with than to get a higher valuation with someone where there's even a question mark, really. In any industry, there are only a few companies that kind of get big and succeed. I don't know. I think it just seems that in the case of Tesla, we were focused on making great products and solving hard engineering problems. As evidence in Tesla for the fact that we solve hard engineering problems is the fact that Toyota and Daimler and Mercedes, buy electric powertrains from us. If this was easy, they would just do it. So we focused on solving really hard engineering problems at Tesla. And so the real cost of solar and real challenge for solar is what's called balance of system. It's everything except the panel. The cost per installed watt for a residential system might be around $4 now, which is a big drop from where it was a few years ago. It used to be sort of $7, $8. Now it's sort of kind of half that. But the optimization really has to be at everything except the panel, because the panels are dropping now to like 90 cents a watt. Over $3 of the $4 is balance of system, which includes the custom ownership experience, designing the system particularly to a particular rooftop, installing it, the wiring, the inverter, after sales service, figuring out the financing of it all. It's in the same way that say DELL. DELL doesn't make the CPU or the hard drive or the RAM or anything, but they kind of design the system and they manage the customer experience, and that's kind of how SolarCity is. It's like starting a company. It's like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. There's a point which obviously it's not that way.
Do you still feel like that, or?
The staring to the abyss part is just, are you facing imminent death? And we certainly were at SpaceX and Tesla and SolarCity for a long time. We're no longer staring into the abyss, which is great. There's always going to be some amount of glass that's got to be chewed. PayPal got started in like late 98 to early 99. It was a sort of merger of two companies, X.com that I started and Confinity that Max Peter started. And we decided to sort of pool our resources and tackle the problem together. We went from starting the company to less than 18 months later, maybe it was 14 months later or something, having a valuation of $500 million. And at the time, it was like, this is completely ridiculous.
Did you feel that way, though? Because I know there were some people inside the company who thought, why are we only worth $500 million?
I thought it was completely ridiculous. No, I'm liking life more and more, actually. As there's less staring into the abyss and less glass chewing, I'm finding that to be a good thing. I hope never to return to the experiences I had in 2008 and 2009.
I had a self-defense mind. I was aware. Where I come from and where I grew up, you had to be aware. You had to be able to defend yourself. So that's how I got into it. You know, society tells you, growing up, you should fantasize about kicking a ball and dream about that, but it didn't really interest me. I tried to maybe pretend